Good evening, everyone. We're so glad to see you here at our webinar. At this moment, I see 36 people, which is great. So the participants are from Armenia, Georgia, and Ukraine. This seminar is taking place in the frames of EU Creative Europe funded project called Visual Stories from Armenia, Georgia, and Ukraine. This project is implemented by three partners, Ari Literature Foundation from Armenia, which I represent, Literature Initiative Georgia from Georgia, and we have representatives here. Medea, Nino are here, and Gomora Publishing House in Ukraine. My name is Arevik Ashkarayan, and I'm really happy to see you all here. I would like to tell you a couple of words about our today's lecturer, Judith Vanistendael. Do I pronounce this correctly, Judith?
Quite, yeah. Vanistendael. It's okay. I cannot pronounce your names either.
That's okay. So Judith is a Belgian comic strip author and illustrator. She won over the public with her first album, Dance by the Light of the Moon, in which she tells the love story of a Togolese politician refugee and a Belgian girl. This two-volume story was nominated twice at Angoulême, book fair, comics book fair, as you probably know, and translated into several languages. In 2012, she published When David Lost His Voice, an intimate graphic novel unanimously acclaimed by critics on its release and nominated for 3 Eisner Awards. With Salto, the story of a candy merchant who becomes a bodyguard, Judith completely changed her universe, delivering over 300 plays created entirely with colored pencils. In 2019, she published The Two Lives of Penelope and won the Bulle d'Humanité Prize. I hope I'm pronouncing this correctly. Best Citizen and Committed Comic of the Year was the nomination. With Whale Library, Judith teams up with scriptwriter Zidrou to deliver a poetic fable about reading. In 2022, she won the Flemish Cultural Prize for Comics for the ensemble of her work. We're very glad that Judith agreed to hold this webinar for us, and we're looking forward for a very interesting lecture and webinar here. I would like to mention that we should, at the end of it, Judith, when you decide, you can open to questions. I hope it might be possible. So
yes.
We're looking forward to hear you now. Thank you, and thank you everybody for your participation. We have 42 participants right now.
Whew. Okay. Hello, everybody. So this was a beautiful introduction. I'm a comic artist from Belgium. In Belgium, comics are very normal. We have a big comic tradition, so it's not a weird thing to be a comic artist. We also have comic university, so I teach at Lucas School of Arts. This is a university in Brussels. It exists in Dutch and it exists in French. I teach in the Dutch part, and we have many students internationally also, because our third bachelor and master are in English, so it's an international bachelor. So we have students from all over the world, which makes it really exciting, and it's really opening up the last years. So thank you very much also for this invitation, because I never have been teaching to people from Armenia, Georgia, and Ukraine. From Ukraine, the last 2 years, sadly, yes. We have some students, refugees who started in our classes. These are a part. I received some of my books in Korean, so those are the books I have at my home. I am at my home now, so those are books I have. You can see that they are those are the classical formats I make, but I also make bigger books. Sometimes it depends a little bit on which public I want to reach, and this is something I will talk about later also. They asked me to teach you, to lecture you about writing for comics, which is a very, very specific thing to do, because comics function in a very specific way, and this is what I will try to explain to you today. And I will explain to you it by the hand of some magical comics concepts. I call it like this because it's really special the way comics work. I call it the magic of comics. And the first thing you need to know, well, obviously, when you see a comic, it is very clear. There is text and there is images. This is very clear. So the key thing to understand, and what I always try to understand, to teach my students or to explain to people who write for comic, is that in comic, the image becomes writing and the writing becomes image. So the images are read like a text, and the text is drawn like an image. I will start to share my screen because I have to explain it by showing you, because of course comic is a very visual medium. I will, every little chapter, I will take a little pause and you can ask me questions, okay? So the first magical concept is writing images and drawing words. This is the most important thing that you can think of when you make comics. It is extremely important. But what does it mean concretely? What you see here is an image of Brecht Evans. I made a PDF with all the names. You will see the next image, you see the title of his book and the name. So I can send this to the organizer so that you can get this PDF, so that you can look up all the names and all the books I have been talking about, because otherwise it's very difficult to remember stuff. So what does it mean when you start writing with images? It means that the image has to be read fluently. If you look at this image, this is a very untypical comic image. It's not good for comics. It's great from time to time to integrate in a comic, but it doesn't work because it's very difficult to read. It's more an illustration or a separate piece of art. This same author, Brecht Evans, he's a Flemish artist who works in France, and has become very, very famous because his images are so beautiful. He is a great comic artist, actually. You can see it in this book, The Wrong Place. This is a book about feeling lost in parties and in life. It's a very psychological book. You can see that this artist here, again, he doesn't do very comic stuff, but here, this is the same artist in this book, really, really telling a story with images and words and in sequence. This is the key of making a good comic. The style doesn't matter. Comic is not a genre as such, but the style doesn't matter, but the readability of the images, the visibility of the words matter. So here you can have a really good example of the difference between an image that works as an illustration, that works as a piece of art, but that obstructs the reading. Brecht Evans sometimes integrates these kind of images, but he always alternates with this. So if you write for a comic, please take into account that the beauty of the image is not so important. It is the readability of the image. One image can be very uninteresting, but the sequence of images can be really, really interesting. This is a very good example of this is Marjane Satrapi. She is famous worldwide. She fled Iran. She made a story about it in comic, and this is the first page of Persepolis. Persepolis is a very, very famous graphic novel, they call it. It's fantastic. It's funny. It's political. It's intelligent. And here you can see that the drawings as such are not very interesting. You wouldn't put them on a wall. I wouldn't put neither of these frames on the wall because it's a bit boring, but together they tell the story of a girl growing up in Iran and how she has to wear the chador and how she wants to play with it and not wear it, how she feels about it. These are two real good examples of very different style, one very Baroque, one very, very sober style of storytelling in comic with images where the readability becomes key. You can see also in this page, you can see that the flow is very well done. You go from the first image to the second image, and a tiny part of the first image is seen in the second image. First, you have one girl with a shadow, then you have the group of girls, and you see it continues from one image to the other. So the image carries you to the next image. This is how readability and visibility in images in a comic work. So image-wise, writing images mean clear images, images that lead you from one to the other and that are not obstructing your reading, that are not so complex that you cannot read the comic anymore. This is absolutely the first and most important aspect that I can show you. What does it mean to draw words? Well, drawing words means that the word becomes, of course, image. It is printed together with an image, and this means that the words become a physical thing. If you read a novel, you can read it on a kobo, you can read it on a screen, you can read it in a book. It doesn't really matter. But a comic, it's very, very different because you have this image aspect, which makes the word very, very physical. It is printed, it is written in a book. I show you some examples where you can combine, where the images and the words are combined in a very visual way. This book is called We Two Together, Ephemeron. It also exists in English. I have here the Dutch version. Ephemeron is a comic artist from Flanders also. She makes very introverted, very beautiful books. This is about her father who died from aphasia, where you lose first your language, then you lose your memory, and then your body stops functioning. So she documented the illness of her father, and she used, you can see it here, on the left you have her experience, on the top right, those are the words the father wrote in a notebook while he was ill. And below is her text about thinking about him. So you can see how the words change in visual aspect depending on who is talking, what is said, etc. So she uses text really as a visual thing in her comics. This is a typical thing in comics. This means also here, for example, Joe Sacco, he's one of the most famous comic journalists in the world. This is one of his older books. It's about the Intifada of the Palestinians. You can see I don't think it's really beautiful, but it's very powerful. And you can see how here the text nearly overpowers the images. It's so present. There is so much text that it becomes really a dense lecture, which he wanted it to be, because the Palestinians live, as we all know, in a very dense place, and he wanted this density to be felt, and he used actually the visibility of the text to show you this, how intense it is, how full of meaning, how difficult everything is there. You can see that he plays with bigger lettering, smaller lettering, weird frames for his lettering, etc., etc., etc. So he's a very good example of text becoming image. What you also see on this page, and this is for me really interesting, that actually text takes up a lot of space. So when you write for comics, the idea is, well, if you want to have a lot of text, that you need a lot of space. If you want to have a lot of voiceover, you need a lot of physical space on the page, which means more pages, a thicker book, etc., etc. The secret to writing for comic in general is writing less words, less words, less words. Also, because in translations, every language has a different length of talking. For example, my language is very short. English is quite short, but when my books are translated into French or in German, those are very long languages. Then I need space to write the French, to write the German. So the idea of the text becoming physical on a page is very important to take into account when you write for a comic. So here you can really see the writing becoming image. Of course, this has very specific consequences. This combination text image and the image as text and the text as image has really weird consequences, actually. Comic is not the only medium where you can combine words and images. For example, the movies, you have it too. But comics is different in the way that you don't impose your time scale on the reader. The reader can choose to read slowly, to look fast, to go to stop, to relook, to go backwards and forward. So that's a very specific thing of comics. What you see here is one of my favorite books. It's called Les Ignorants. It exists in English too. This is my version. This is the book I have at home. It's by Etienne Davodeau, who is a French artist. And here you see him on the top of this cover. You see him on the left drawing, and on the right you see his friend, who is a winemaker. Of course, we are in France, so there is wine. And this book is about his friendship with his winemaker, and they decided to learn each other's trade. So the comic artist will learn about growing vines, making wine, tasting wine, and the winemaker will learn about how do you make a comic, because both are very difficult, both are very, not everybody knows a lot about it, and so they decide to interest themselves for each other's trade. And the book starts like this. I really like the start because it's a very good example of first, the image can be very boring and still you can have a masterpiece. Here the images are really, I don't know, the cups of coffees are too small, the hands are too small, the table is too big. It's a weird drawing. It's not a good drawing. Actually, Davodeau is not famous for his fantastic drawings. He's an efficient visual artist. He writes and he draws at the same time, and this is in French. But what happens here is that those two sit together with a cup of coffee, and the right guy, the winemaking guy, says, "Okay, so you want to make a book about wine, okay? And you want to come and work in my wineries." And the comic artist on the left, he said, so we know he has already proposed the idea of the book. It's not even told, it's not even written. You see it because of the dialogue and the combination of the two figures at the table. And the other one answers, it's not everything, and I want to have to explain it. It's a long story, and like a French guy. And the other, in the meantime, walks away. So you can see that the image is continuing already on another pace than the text. The image goes a little bit faster than the text. And the next page, you see that the guy was looking for some wine. He comes back and he says, "Okay, let's start." And so here you see the interweaving of different rhythms of text and image. And on the right of the page, you see la taille, and la taille is when you cut the vines in winter to grow better. And that's where the visibility of the text, the image of the text, is a story in itself. La taille, the cutting, so we start. That's what's written there. And so he uses in a very minimalistic way. It's in black and white. It's not well drawn. The lettering is a bit difficult to read, but the rhythming and the different rhythms of text and image are so well done that the story just takes you immediately in it. It's an incredibly beautiful book about friendship and about knowledge and about knowing your trade and about really being a good technician. And this is what this Monsieur Davodeau really, really is. So this is an example of one of the nice consequences of text-image combinations. The other nice consequence is that not only can your text and your image have different rhythm, but you can also oh, my pages are a bit wrong. You can also show silence. You can visualize silence, and this is a fantastic thing to do in comic. The image can continue and the text can fall away, and you read the silence. A very good book to show this is from Eric Lambé. Eric Lambé, he's a teacher in the other comic school in Brussels, in Saint-Luc. This is The Landscape After the Battle, it is called. It's about a man and a woman, and they lose their child in an accident. And the woman runs away, and she goes to a camping, and she stays in a camper, and she tries to get over it, but she isn't capable of doing this. And here you can see, here she gets a letter from the judge where she has to appear in front of the judge because the man is asking for a divorce. And this man, you see here, he's the camping owner, and he wants to give her the letter. And so there is very little text. It's already quite silent. And she says, "Enter, I'll give you coffee." And then what happens is, the only thing she says is, "It's odd. This is my daughter." You don't even see the face of the daughter. And then he's silent. She says something small. He says, "I'm so sorry." And that's all. And then he says, "Here is your letter." So here you can see how the text disappears. The silence becomes the text. The image becomes the text completely. And in this book, he uses this all the time. He is really a master in doing this. It's a very touching book, and it's very, very, very emotional. And the third consequence, so you have already two consequences. One consequence is the different rhythming of text and image. The second consequence is not having text can have an incredibly strong meaning because there is another part of the storytelling that goes on, the image. So the silences in comics are extremely powerful. They're very much used also by a lot of comic artists because they're one of the most powerful tools you have. And then the other powerful thing, of course, is, and I showed this with one of my first book I ever made, Dance by the Light of the Moon. This is an autobiographical book of my first relationship with a political refugee, Abu. You see us together here. We were very much in love. I was very, very young when I met this guy, and I made a book out of it. It's a book in black and white. It's very cheap to print. It was my debut, so I couldn't afford a lot of expensive stuff. But what you see here, it's a very boring page. Actually, it's a page I would rarely allow my students to make because it's a page full of talking heads. You only see heads talking, and that's generally, it's very boring. But I didn't think about it when I made it. And what is important on this page is this is the Dutch version, but you have it also in English. Here, Abu is telling me what happened to him in Togo, how he was tortured. And so the key here is that you don't show, you tell. So the whole thing about showing, not telling is here reversed. This is a thing you can really do in comic. You can not write and show, but you can also not show but write, not draw but write. And here the drawing is absolutely minimal. He is telling the most horrible things about being tortured by his own uncle. It's really a horrid story. You cannot read it because it's in Dutch, but it is, and so the imagination of the reader becomes stronger because you're free to. It's very difficult to draw a torture scene that is convincing. It's very difficult. And so I leave here the room for the reader to think, to imagine the torture, and the torture that you imagine yourself is always the worst. So because everybody has other pains and other horrors and other things that are the worst to experience. So these are the three things, the three nice consequences of text becoming image and image becoming text. I give you some more examples for this part. Oh no, this is the, I will stop sharing this for a small while. How do I do this? I'm not so good in technique, I'm sorry. So did I stop the sharing?
Yes, that's okay.
Yes.
You stop the
Okay.
sharing.
So for everybody writing about comic, this is a key concept to take into account when you. Okay. Then we go to the second concept, which is a consequence of the first concept, but it's quite different. So when I make a comic, I both write and draw. So I do both. And when I'm drawing, I cannot talk. I can talk. I'm sorry. I can talk. So I'm drawing and I can talk to my colleague who is drawing also at her table. When I'm writing, I cannot talk. And this is because I use different parts of my brain. So when you make comics and when you do both images and text, it's different parts of the brain that come into action. I'll show you this in an image. Okay. So the third layer of meaning, that's how I call the second concept. Here you see the brain, and you see the visual brain, and you see the language brain, and you can see clearly that it's in different parts. The visual cortex is in the back of the head, and the language is more in the middle of the brain somewhere. So images and text work completely different. If you look at the story of mankind, you see that language came first. This is very clear. The talking came, it's very important for us. But when you look at the art, you see that writing comes really late. Writing is actually very, very, very recent. And making images, if you look at the, I don't know, the caves in France with the bisons and the horses that are drawn on the walls, you can see, okay, there is no writing, there is images. Writing is a very complex system that you have to decode. You have to learn to read. You do not have to learn to look at an image. You do not have to learn to look at the wall in the cave to see that's a bison or that's a horse or that's a human being. So it has a very, very different way of communicating. So images are extremely direct. They go to your stomach, bam, straight on. Text is less direct. It can be very strong, but it has always an intermediate of the alphabet, of the decoding of the alphabet, and then it goes to your stomach. So it's a very, very different way of communicating. And what happens in a comic is that you use these two communication systems, and the reader in the brain starts using two parts of the brain, two different parts, and will create a third meaning, a layer of meaning of its own that you didn't put in it. You didn't put it in the comic. You put an image and you combine it with a text, but the reader can do whatever with those two. The reader can just imagine so many combinations, because the combinations, of course, depends on who the reader is. Everybody makes different combinations. So this is what I call the third layer of meaning. And if you manage to work with this creation of a third layer of meaning, of leaving the possibility to the reader of creating the third layer of meaning, then you get a comic that is really, really, really very rich, and that people start reading intensively and where they get a lot from. And I guess, so I want to show you an example with for this third layer of meaning, and I show it with Zaina Rabichet. She is from Lebanon. She lives in France, and she made this book about the civil war in Lebanon. It's A Game for Swallows: To Die, to Live, to Return. It's about a group of people. They live in Lebanon in a building, and there is bombing. Of course, there is bombing, and they all crowd together in one specific place because it's the safest place in the building, and it's the hallway of one specific apartment. And everybody is sitting in this apartment, and the whole comic is in this apartment, is in this same room. And it's a very weird visual comic because you always see the same room. You can see it here on the right. and you can see them all sitting there. In the beginning, only 2 persons sit there of the book, then people start coming and coming and coming and coming. And what happens on this page is that you realize someone is lost. And so this man with the curly hair on the top left, he say, I know that you don't like it, but I have to go. Goodbye. And the man with the mustache, his name is Ernest. He looks only angry. He doesn't say anything. And then the voiceover says, and Chukri disappeared in the night. And you only see the reaction of Ernest. So you can see already that they belong together, that I guess they're a couple, and that Ernest doesn't want him to go, but he goes. And then on the right page, all this you can see from 4 images and 3 pieces of text. You can feel the tension. And then on the right page, you don't see Ernest with the mustache anymore. He's sitting outside of the page. And the only text that you can see is, quiet, Ernest, come and sit here. So you can feel the despair of Ernest with the mustache just from a few images and the text combined. And you can feel a whole world appearing. In my head, Ernest and Chukri, the 2 men, are living together. Their relationship is already under tension. You can imagine a whole entire world of this small combination of words and images. I guess a lot of you are already storytellers, so I guess that everybody knows that you never have to give away everything, because then the reader gets bored. If a comic or if a story is too explanatory, it becomes really not nice to read. I don't know why, but people are easily bored. So you need to trust on their intelligence, and in comic this is really, really important. Trust the intelligence and the imagination of the reader. You will not be there to explain things to them. So everybody will read a different book once they get the comic. I will read a different comic than my brother, than my mother, than my best friend when they read the same book. This is for every book, I guess, but for comics, it's really, really like this. Me, myself, I make books, and then people start reading them and they see things in it I would never imagine. And this is because you get this combination of image and text, and the brain starts just constructing new meanings, combining the two. So if I would have to summarize what images are good for, I would say images are good for landscapes, visuals, world building, beauty, atmosphere, a lot of symbolism, for seducing with beauty and with poetry. And texts are very good for thoughts. Everything you think, it's difficult to draw it, but you can write it easily. So try to use text. Is also good for inside information, for dates. Well, dates, it's difficult to draw a date. Place names, poetry, word symbolism. So try to use the image for the strength of the image and the text for the strength of the text. So you have 2 very powerful systems of meaning that you can use in a comic, and try to use them when they're at their strongest. What you see here is a very, very beautiful book, The Paisleys. It's about 3 children. They lose their mother and they go to Alaska. It's a very weird thing. But here you can really see, if you see this landscape, it would be very hard to describe it in words. You could describe what's happening, that the 2 kids are standing in front and they see a reindeer and blah, and the sky is pink. But if you look at these colors, you can nearly not describe them. It would be a pity not to draw it and to describe it. So here you really see the strength of the image in full use. But the opposite is also true. This is a book of Émilie Plateau Noir. It's about Claudette Colvin. She is one of the activists of the Black Lives Matter. She but she's not very famous. So this author, she tries to unveil the story of Claudette Colvin and to give her the attention that she deserved. She refused to go and sit in the back of the bus as a Black woman. And she really doesn't draw a lot. She tells a lot. This is the trial. And it's really nice because here you can see that the words are very important, because of course in a trial the way you formulate the judgment is extremely important. So here she doesn't really draw the trial, she writes the trial, because the formulation, the way the judgment will be pronounced will have a huge impact on later justice and will have huge consequences. So of course here she doesn't draw it, she writes it. This is for me a very good example of how text is at its absolutely strongest, and the image are just there to rhythm a little bit the text. The images are not very revealing, they're just, a boring trial. It's not very interesting, but it's a very powerful scene. This is Marzi. Marzi is a book from a Polish artist, Marzena, and it's about her life in Poland before the wall fell, of course. And it's a fabulously beautiful book about a kid growing up in communism, and you can see plenty of voiceover, because she's writing how she feels, what she thinks, her hopes, her fears, everything as a child. She writes it down, so you can see what happens in the images. Things happen, you can see her life going on, and then you can see her thoughts and feelings in the voiceover, which is such a beautiful way to tell this, because it's very difficult. It would take pages and pages to show that she feels really happy about getting a banana. It would just take pages, and here you can really tell it. Wow, banana, and the whole complexity of feeling and of inside thoughts can become a really dense network of information and of emotion. And it's a very, very funny and very beautiful account of her childhood. It's extremely touching, even if the drawings are not very touching. They're very simple and the text looks a bit boring, but it is not. So in these examples, you can really see strong images, the strength of image and the strength of text, and both are as important. There is not one more important than the other. So this is the second concept of making comics. So you have two concepts already. You have the concept of writing images and drawing words. You have the concept of the third layer of meaning. Both extremely important to keep in mind when you try to do storytelling in comics. And the third concept that I have three concepts, and afterwards I will give you examples of how I work with the text and how I work with script writers and writing my own comic. The third key concept is the physicality of the object of the book or of the screen and the scrolling. I will talk about books because that's what I'm most used to, but actually the same is true for scrolling on a screen. If you have a comic or if you have a screen, the book is very physical. It's very physical. You cannot listen to comics. You have to see them. They have to be printed or they have to be on a screen. And the book has a very specific weight. It is like a sculpture. It is touchable. It is thick or thin. It is an object. Very, very, very important. It is an object. So what does it mean? It means that, for example, my father is a writer. He is a prose writer, poetry, stuff like that. And when he deletes a word, it doesn't matter. All the other words go forward and there is no big exchange for the page layout or the book or whatever. In comic, as it's such a physical thing, as it's such a material thing, if I take out an image, if I take out a word, the page changes completely. The whole visuals change, and you cannot just take out one image, because then there is a gap, a wide gap. I just cannot take out one page, because then this page goes there, and the whole rhythm changes. You have the turning of the pages, which is really important, because every time you turn a page, there is a small pause. So the sequencing goes also through the object. If you're scrolling on a screen, well, it's more flat, it's more fluid, but the image on top disappears while the next is coming. So you have this very specific action of scrolling. It's a very physical thing, actually, a comic. And I will show you, I made a really stupid drawing. Okay. There we go, the object. There we are. It's a very important concept. A lot of people forget this. Many of my students forget that they are making something that people will have in their hands, will use, put on the table, put into their bed, etc., etc. And it's key. Here you see the spread of a book and the consequences of this spread, which is also very typical for a comic. You see the Pinocchio in the middle. If the drawing in the middle is drawn badly,
sorry, the imagery is not visible.
Huh?
Could you check? Screen
That's
is
strange.
not visible. Yeah.
That's strange. Wait.
Try sharing again, please, Judith. Yes, it's
Yeah.
black.
I'm trying again. Yeah. Wait. Can you see it?
Yes,
Thank
now
you.
it's fine.
Okay. So you see, this is an open book with an image in the middle, with a nose that is broken in two because it's in the middle of the book, and this is what happens when you draw in the middle of a book. The image becomes distorted. You never have this in a novel. But in a comic, this is one of the problems you deal with. In a comic, you have the reading direction that is extremely important. It's extremely important what starts on the upper left and what ends on the lower right. This is the reading direction in my culture. Of course, in other cultures, you read from right to left or from top to down or whatever. But in my culture, this is the scheme I have to take into account when I'm writing for a comic. You cannot start a scene. You cannot write and say to the visual artist or to yourself, okay, I will start in the middle of a page. This is not working. You have to start on the top left. A new scene starts like an alinea in a novel. In a comic, the alinea starts top left, always. So you have to fill up the space. And if you want a next scene, then you turn the page and there is the next scene. This is again the physicality, the materiality of a comic. It's that you have to fill all this space, and you have to take into account of the turning of the pages in the book. The reading direction is also very important, and where do you place the images? If I go back, for example, I just go back on this page, you can see that on the right outside of the book, something is happening visually. There is Ernest with the mustache sitting right of the right page. And we know this because somebody is talking to him and looking at him to the right. So this is what the object means. This is how it works. You can have things happening outside of the page because someone is looking outside of the page, or some words come from the outside of the page. And then the page turns and a new scene will start. This is how comics always work. You cannot not take this into account. It's extremely important. So what does it mean also that you have to print the images? A comic can be very expensive, can be extremely cheap. You have really chic comics, you have self-published comics. This is, for example, a very cheap publication, Blankets. It's a masterpiece. It's Craig Thompson. It's about a first love. It's an absolute masterpiece, but it's really cheaply printed. It's black and white. You could put it on a photocopy machine and just print the book on a copy machine. You know, it wouldn't change anything in the experience of the book. Mouse, for example, is it's a world famous masterpiece. It's definitely a masterpiece, but it's so cheaply published. If you look at this is a bitmapped black and white image printed on a stupid white page. It's not even expensive paper. It's super, super cheap, and still this is the most famous comic in the world, in the entire world, and it's the cheapest ever published because it's just black and white. It's nothing. It's so cheap. Then you can have these kinds of comics, Via Transit by Nicolas de Crécy. This is expensive because look at the colors. It's difficult to reproduce this. This is really, really, really difficult to reproduce because the colors are so subtle, and you need good paper, and you need good scanning, or you need, this is not even made on the computer. It's made with watercolor. It's pages and pages. The artist making watercolor, someone scanning them, calibrating, sending it to the printer. It's a huge work. It's super expensive. This is the way I like to work, but it's so expensive, and the books become so expensive that nobody buys them. So this is also something about a comic. You can do cheap, you can do expensive. Both can be masterpieces, both can be touching, both can be very intense. This has nothing to do with the price of the printing. This has, masterpieces can be in black and white, but they can also be in color. And of course, color can be so beautiful. If you work in color, also on the screen, if you work for digital comics, reading on the screen, it becomes so luminous. It can be so seducing. It can be so involving. It really takes you into the comic. So it depends a little bit on what you want to do, what you like, the budget you have, etc., etc. If you look further into this question of physicality, then you will see that the size of the comic, the size of the book or of the publication is also very, very, very important. Because first of all, standard sizes are cheaper. So printing is very important in this process. A book can, Dostoevsky, you can read it in a very small pocket book. You can read it in a very chic, published, expensive, big book. It's the same Dostoevsky. It doesn't change Dostoevsky. But here, in comic, it changes everything. Also, the size of the paper will allow you to have different rhythms. This is Barakrima dans the taxi. Barakrima, he's a transgender from Lebanon. He had to flee Lebanon. He lives in Belgium right now. She lives in Belgium right now. She has become a woman, and she tells in this comic, it's only in French. It's published by Alif Bata. About her experiences as a kid in Lebanon, how difficult it was. It's a small book, and you can see that there is only place for 2 layers, like 2 rows. You understand? So this is a very slow pace. If you only have 2 rows, the pace goes really, really, really slow. This is an Israeli book. I have been mixing all kinds of books. I hope you don't mind. Ruto Modan, she's one of the most critical Israeli comic artists I know. This book is Tunnels. It's about the tunnels in Palestine. And it's about the Palestinians meeting the Israelis around a joint expedition. And this is a 3-row comic, as you can see. So this is also already a little bit faster. Here you can see that the pace goes up. You can tell more here than you can tell here. Here it's very slow. Here it's more classical. It goes a little bit faster. This exists in English also. And then you have the classical comic size, the French, what we call the Franco-Belge. This is the comic size I grew up with. It's not a soft cover, but a hard cover, so it's less pliable. Those are soft covers. You can see it from the way I touch the book. They are very pliable. It's cheaper, but it's also more fragile. This is soft cover. This is hardcover. This is the most classic way of publishing comics in Western Europe. In America, they publish more soft covers. It depends a little bit of the country you're publishing is. But this, for me, it's the most classical, and it's the 4-row comic. This is Tintin. This is classic. It's not Tintin. This is Rabaté, Sex, Drug, and Rock and Roll, Second Youth. It exists in English, but this is really, here you can do adventures, you can do a lot of stuff happening, you can do emotions. It's actually a very versatile format of storytelling in comic. It's the most widely used. I use mostly the 3-layer comic, but I like also this 4 layers. And then if you do an upgrade, you have this Les Indes Fourbes. This is a very crazy comic with a big adventure. It needs a lot of space, and a lot of things are happening. So it goes to 5 lines. And you can see the difference between this and this in rhythm. Here you have 2 stories at the same time happening at the same time, and it's a crazy story, and you can see it in the rhythming of the page only already. It's high level rhythm. You can also, of course, go completely outside the classical formats. This is Heimat. It's by Nora Kruh. She's a Jewish German living in America, and she went back to Germany to discover her. No, is she Jewish? Wait, I don't know. She went back to Germany to look at her family, and this is how she solved it. So there is no frames, there is pictures, there is collage, there is some comic, there is all kinds of things, and she combines this in a heartbreaking family story. So it's incredibly beautiful, but very different from what is classically done. This is all possible. You can do anything in a comic. The only thing that you do is combine images and words, and you do it the way you want to do it. There is no rule. It's not a genre. It's just a medium. It's like painting. It's like film. It's like photography. You can do whatever you want to with it. There is no Bible of comic storytelling. It's a very free medium. This is a book of mine that I want to show to I like to work a lot with page layout. I think it's very important to reflect on this. And in this book, I will show you a short example of how I changed the page layout to get a different kind of storytelling. This book is about the Penelope. You see the woman on the cover here. It exists in English. You can find it online in English. And she's a war surgeon. So she's a surgeon who works in a hospital in Brussels, but with Medicine Without Borders, she goes to war zones to do surgery on war victims. And she comes home from Syria, and she doesn't feel at home anymore, and she takes this little ghost with her from a girl that died while she was operating her in Aleppo. And here in the next page, this is not how it appeared in the book. This is how I first made it. On the left, you see the daughter of Penelope sleeping at home. On the right, it is written up on the top, as you see Brussels. And on the right, you see exactly the same date, but there is written Aleppo. And you see, yeah, a bombing happened, and there is a girl who is a victim, and you see someone operating. This is Penelope. And this goes on like this for pages and pages, but I changed the layout completely. I started like this, and then I went to this. So what you see here I go, left is the story of the daughter, right is the story of war. So left is the story of peace and home and easy life. On the right is the story of war, of terror, of violence. If you do it like this, what I show you now, the story becomes alternating. So when you see the peace on the right, war, you turn the page, war, and you go in between them. But I want alternating. I want war happens together with peace. I live in a very peaceful country. Some of you live in a very, very violent country, violent times. So I wanted it to be simultaneous. And so I changed the order and I put a row on top of my life. It's my house, it's my daughter sleeping in her bed, and down on the bottom there is the war life. And so this continues like this for 10 pages, so you see it parallel and there is no alternating, so it gets a completely different meaning. So here you can see how using the page, where you put what story and how you use the rhythm of the page, has a very, very big impact on how your story feels and what you're telling. Actually, here I'm telling completely different stuff than here. Here it's not simultaneous, it's alternating. Here it's simultaneous, it's happening exactly at the same time. So the direction of your visuals, where you put them on the page, how you tell it, is very important for the meaning of the story. Second part, it's a very example part. I will talk about 2 systems of making a comic that I use myself, and I will show you some examples. The first example I want to give is writing with a script, working with someone who writes the script for you. So this is for the Whale Library, which is not written by me, it's written by Zidrou. Zidrou is a Belgian scriptwriter. He doesn't draw, he doesn't know how to draw, and he works for visual artists who make comics. So we work together for this Whale Library book. As you can see, it's a very big book. Okay, so here already I didn't do what he asked. I will explain you. So I will share the screen again. Here. Do you see this, writing a script? Do you see this image?
Yes, yes.
Okay. So here you see the book with a librarian or something, and you see a text that Zidrou wrote to me. Here he started writing to me about the format of the book. So he's a scriptwriter and he has a horizontal format in his mind. He explains why. It's, of course, it's about the ocean. It's about a library in a huge whale in the ocean. So he wants to have it horizontal. But as you can see, the book is extremely vertical and it's a very tall book. It's not at all the way he asked it to be. And this is because of the price. I wanted it to be printed very beautifully, and horizontal books are extremely expensive. So what I did is I asked the standard size, the biggest standard size of my publishing house, and this is what you see is the biggest standard size of my publishing house. And also I made it vertical because it's about a talking whale. The whale talks to human beings, and it's a whale is a huge animal. It's very difficult to get it into a comic, because a comic, of course, is sequences, it's very small images. And so I decided upon vertical. I talked to Zidrou about it, and he said, okay, let's do it like this. So what you see here in the text here on the right is talking about this and about the atmosphere of the images in the book. So he gives me a hint in an introduction text, how he sees, how he feels the story, what kind of visual feel he wants. And he says, okay, I didn't really describe the images so that I give the maximum of freedom to the dessinatrice, to the visual artist. But then, and I said, wow, fantastic, maximum freedom. And then he sent me this. Page A, page B, page C, full page, and then a whole of text. And then this. And there, what you can see is that there is a lot of information that I have taken out of this text. What you see in this text is the voiceover, the dialogues, and you see a description here. You see a description of visuals. So in between, he describes how he sees the stuff. Here, for example, he says the voiceover have to be in 3 images. I didn't put it into 3 images. So he already starts guiding me towards, you have to put 3 images here, you have to do this, you have to do this. I took a lot of this information out. I told him, I sent him an email and I said, look, Zidrou, I don't want to work like this. I don't want you to tell me how many images on a page I should draw, where I should draw what. I want your dialogues, I want your voiceovers, and I want your atmosphere descriptions, but that's it. Okay, so this is in general what they would send to you, but then very often a lot of writers put in already a rhythm of images. They put the sequence already there. I advise every writer not to do this, to trust the visual artist. And if you're a visual artist there yourself, that comes later, because I have another example of another book of mine. So you write this way. So it's not prose you're writing. It's more like for movies, it's in scenes you write, and it's in page rhythm that you write. You say, okay, these 4 pages will be this scene. The next 6 pages will be this scene. You need 1 page for this scene. What happens a lot in comic is also that once the scenes are made, once they are sketched, you will shuffle the scenes. One scene will be put in front of the other, etc. It's like montage in movies. It's a puzzle. Comics very often is a kind of puzzle, and scenes very often change place. This is something that you have to get used to. It's a weird thing, but it's the way it works a lot. So the writer gives me wait a moment, my PDF is not reacting anymore. Wait a moment. Why is it not reacting? Okay, I have to share it again, I'm sorry. So this is what a script looks like, with different text images, you know, the text typos, so that you can see the difference between voiceover, between remarks, between description, between dialogue. And this is how it comes out with me. I take the text, as you can see, and I put it on images. I take the text literally. And sometimes I write on it, and I wrote the red is start of the book. There is the beginning of the book. It looks like this. Very often I print the text. Here you can see, yeah, I just printed the text and I cut it out with scissors and I pasted it on the images I was making. This is how it looks, how this gets translated. Here is page A, la mer comme la cœur de l'homme, blah, blah, blah. Here you see page C, page D, so it's the next text. This is, sometimes I write it by hand because it's faster. It depends a little bit. So it's a big mess. This is how it looks. This is how this is translated into this sequence. So you get, yeah, and inside, and this is then what it looks like finished. So you go from this to this. That's how it works. This part, the writing doesn't take so you can write a script very fast. Zidrou did it in a few months. He gave me it in 2 months. It was finished. It took me, drawing and sketching does take a lot more time. It took me a year to go from this to the final book. There was a lot of dialogue between Zidrou and me. I advise everybody who writes for someone else, who works together with a visual artist, to collaborate intensively. Not just to make a text, give it to the artist, and then bye-bye. No, try to communicate. The visual artist needs to have the space to say, well, this is difficult to draw. Because sometimes you write something and then it doesn't work in images. This is very often the case. Not so much with Zidrou, because he has been writing already 1,000 comics. He has made so many comics, so he knows how it works. But very often you write a scene and then you try to translate it into images, and it just doesn't work. This is because it's two different ways of creating meaning, and it's difficult to understand one way or the other very often. So the translation is not always easy. So this is how it can work. What I also did with Zidrou is that I took out some scenes because I thought they were not good. And I said, they're not good. So feel free, or he also said of images of mine, they're not good. So this, for example, this page, I had to redo it a few times because he wasn't happy with it, with the rhythm. So it's a real collaboration if you work with two persons on writing and drawing. And you don't be afraid to tell each other what you don't like. Don't be afraid to be critical, but be respectful of the knowledge of the other. This is important. For example, Zidrou, he's incredible at combining image, visual storytelling with voiceover and dialogue. This is a very difficult thing to do. So voiceover is one of the most difficult things in comic. And I can know because I have been trying to do it for years. It becomes very, very fast, very cheesy, very kitsch. So if you write a voiceover for comics, a good advice is that you write it with someone in mind that you're writing to. So for example, write it like a letter to someone, or like a story you're telling to your child, or a story you're telling to your grandmother, whatever. Write it for someone, because it's a very difficult thing to do, and it becomes a very, very fast, cheap philosophy, and then it's really not good. Also, try not to double up voiceover and image. So this is a task also for the visual artist. If you get a voiceover, don't just draw the voiceover. That's boring. Text doing the same as the image, that's really boring. So those are the advices that I can give you for this kind of work. It looks, to me, it looks very boring like this, but then it becomes to life when I start putting it into a rhythm, and it's really nice. So I took out all the indications of page, all the indications of rhythm, all the indications of frame that Zidrou put in the text, and I did my own stuff. And I said to him that I did it. Not everybody works like this, but I don't want to be guided by pages and I want to do my own rhythming because I really like rhythming. The other way to work is that you do everything yourself, so that you're both visual artist and writer, so that you use those both parts of your brain and then you try to combine them in a piece of art. This is what I do a lot. I enjoy it a lot, but it's much harder. For me, working with a scriptwriter, it's a kind of holiday. Making my own storylines, making my own books is way harder. And I took a typical page of how I work, and you can see that I write and I draw at the same time. And the drawing I do is very sketchy, and it's more about how do I rhythm the dialogue here. Here it's a dialogue with she's talking to a psychologue. How do I rhythm it? Then are the images well drawn? So you see that I write what she's saying at the same time as that I draw it. It's all on the same page. It's one part is separate from the other. The rhythm is indicated. How do I want to rhythm the page? How do I want to be her in the cases, in the frames? So it's a way of thinking that is really using both at the same time. This is why I want to show it like this. And this is the first step. Then I do the whole book, everything. I do it in sketches, and then I do it in Finnish. So this right page is here. You can see it finished here in English. That's what it looks like. And what you can see also is that I leave enough space for the text. There is everywhere the text is already immediately integrated in the drawing. This is so important. Do not make drawings and then when everything is finished, you add text balloons, because then the text balloons will be on top of the drawing. They need to be integral part. The text is part of the image. It is image. Text is image. Text is image. I would put this on a big poster when you're working above in front of your desk. Text is image. Image is text. This is so important, and you can see it here. Also here you can see that there is space and that I make space and that I integrate the text immediately. And you can see that here in the sketch it doesn't work and then I solve it here. You can see that the text is on the whale on the right page, that you don't see the text enough. And here I say, okay, no, I put it on top. It's way clearer. And on the right, I stop the drawing to make space for the text. So it's really one thing, text and image. And here you can see it too. So those are two examples of how you can work. So when you write for comics, this is specifically when you write for comics, there is some things that you have to always think. One, text is image. So writing for comics, it's not the same as writing for journalistic pieces, for novels, poetry. It's completely different. It's a completely different writing. It's also different from writing for movies, because movies, they impose the rhythm, and in comics the rhythm is not imposed, so it's very, very tangible. If you decide to work with a visual artist, this is only for the writers, not for the people who want to draw and write at the same time. But if you want to work with a visual artist, don't be impressed by technically really impressive visual artists, because if the drawing is too virtuoso, the reading is obstructed. So don't be impressed by impressive drawings. You don't need impressive drawings to tell a good story. It is not important. Look at Persepolis, look at Mouse. You will have access to the PDF that I showed today, so you will have access to a lot of examples. It's not about impressive drawing. So try to look for someone who is good at drawing faces, who is good at drawing emotions, good at acting, we call it in the comic class, who is good at composition, and who understands something about rhythm and flow and readability of the image. It's a very different way of drawing. The third thing is, and this I was talking about when I talked about the whale library, is give the visual artist freedom. Don't try to interfere. It's a difficult job. So drawing for comics, writing for comics is quite fast actually, because the amount of story that you can put in one comic is not big. Most comics are short stories. You don't realize it because they are very thick and there is a lot of drawing, but actually they are short stories. They are not huge novels. It's impossible. Storytelling in comic is very slow. So writing for comic goes quite fast, but drawing the script, it's very slow. It's a lot of work. So take your time, be patient. It's difficult. Okay. And then one thing I really want to tell everybody who writes for comics, writing an action scene, for example, they run towards the castle and there is a big fight. You can write it in 3 sentences, but if you have to draw running towards the castle and a big fight, it takes weeks. So writing action scenes needs a lot of pages in visuals, and it's very time consuming. Writing emotions, it's very difficult, but drawing emotions, it's very short and very easy. You just draw a face, you show it in tears, and there it is. You can show emotions more easily than you can write them. You can write action more easily than you can show it. So there is a difference between the fastness of writing scenes and drawing scenes. There is a very big difference. So those are the things that I want you to take with you. I also added, I also made a PDF of this, what I'm telling you right now. So a short PDF. So I will share it also through the organization. And I also made you a list of books about making comics. You have the book of Linda Barry, Making Comics. It's a very funny book with very funny exercises. You have 99 Ways to Tell a Story. This is the same, actually it's the same scene, but told in 99 different ways. I find it very inspiring because it shows you all the possibilities of different kinds of storytellings for the same scene. I think it's a guy taking something from a fridge, a drink from the fridge or something. And every 99 times he tells it in a different way. It's incredibly interesting. Scott McCloud is the great classic of making and understanding comics. It's very classical. So I would say read it, look at it, but then throw it away, because you need your freedom in comics. And this is also very nice. This is where I got the first title from, Drawing Words and Writing Pictures. It's a very practical guide to making comics. It's really nice. Jessica Abel, she's a very, very good comic artist herself. So I really like this book because it's really from her practical experience that she made this book. You can do what I sometimes make my students do, because of course my students are very often very scared to make a story, is to work with to make a photo comic. So you work with photos instead of drawing yourself. So this is with collage. I have been showing one collage book, Heimat, by Nora Krook. She works with pictures and then she writes with the pictures. If you're afraid of drawing and if you think you're not, I don't know if you're afraid, try to make a collage. That's a really nice way to start too, to get over your fears. No, you're always afraid. I'm always afraid when I publish a story, because you're naked in front of the public. It's super scary for everybody. And it doesn't get better. It gets worse with me. I was much braver in the beginning. I just did it. And now I'm super scared of the eye of the others. But the good thing about comics, you can take an artist name, a nom de plume, so that nobody knows who you are. That's what nobody has to know you. That's one thing. Second, you make your comics, you can make them in a small corner and then show them to the world when you think you're ready. It's not like a piano concerto where you have to go on stage, perform, and it has to be good at the moment. For me, it really helps to think, okay, I can publish it when I'm ready. I can show it when I'm ready, and nobody has to know it's me. I can hide behind a wall. So this for me, it really helps. And what also helps is to write fiction. Hide yourself inside the story. For example, this book, it's not at all autobiographical. It's about experiences I lived through, because I had my stepfather died of cancer. I lost him, and I wrote a fictional book about losing someone from cancer. I'm not in this book. You don't see me. You don't see my stepfather. You don't. It's a fiction. So I invented characters. I invented a house. I invented a situation to be able to talk about things I experienced and to share it with the world without them seeing my life. So I think there is different possibilities to hide yourself. But it's always scary. It's always scary. Because you give it to the world, and then people just can do whatever they want, and you're not there to defend yourself. Super scary.
If there are no more questions, then maybe we can wrap up. It has been Very long, very interesting, very long for you, not for us, because we would continue hearing your advice and everything longer, Judith. Thank you very much.